Lots of questions remain about the Jussie Smollet case. Prosecutors say he was not exonerated, but he still maintains his innocence. How unusual is that in a so-called alternative resolution case, and why the apparent lack of communication between the state's attorney and the police department? Joining us are Jeffrey Erdangen, a criminal defense attorney and director of Northwestern University's Center for Criminal Defense, Andrew Weisberg, also a criminal defense attorney and a former Cook County prosecutor, and Charles Whitaker, a professor and interim dean at Northwestern University's Medill School of Journalism. We should also note that we invited Smollett's attorney, who was unable to join us tonight, but we thank you all for being here. First, Mr. Weisberg, how unusual is today's alternative resolution to this case?
Well, I think it's unusual. I happened to be sitting in the courtroom today just by coincidence. I had a case in that room, and I saw what happened, and my jaw dropped to the ground. I've had many clients go through these alternative prosecutions. The first assistant state's attorney is correct. They do a lot of deferred prosecutions, but they're generally not done like this. Normally, it's about a year of a program. You have to complete it. You have to do everything they tell you. And if you complete the program, at the end, you earn the dismissal of the case. Doing it up front like this, about 2 weeks after the indictment, is extremely unusual.
And we learned that Smollet did 16 hours of community service with Rainbow Push. And based on that, the prosecutor decided that was enough. Is that the standard amount of time?
Well, it differs. Typically, 16 hours community service is what you might expect on a misdemeanor shoplifting case or something of that nature. A case like this, of this magnitude, I was very surprised that when I learned 16 hours of community service, I would have thought it would have been hundreds of hours and probably more in the way of restitution for the cost of the investigation.
Jeffrey Erdangen, is it common in a case like this for the defendant to maintain their innocence even though the prosecutor contends, no, the case was fine, the evidence was fine, he is not exonerated, this is just the deal?
I don't think the defendant cares what the prosecutor says. Strikes me, he's innocent. Why would they dismiss the case against him? They gave him, Smollet and his legal team gave up nothing in exchange for this. $10,000, that's tokenism. It's a very puzzling situation, and I don't understand what Emmanuel is so angry about and who he's angry at. It seems to me that the person who should be angry here is the defendant, Jussie Smollet. What he went through, and then as it turns out, the state dismissed the charges against him in a high visibility case like this. I'm sorry, there's a lot of unanswered questions.
There are a lot of unanswered questions. Charles Whitaker, one of the things the defendant was upset at was the leaks coming from the police department during this investigation and all the stories in the media. Do you think that played a role here in choosing to dismiss these charges? The fact that there were so many leaks, and they felt they were already convicted in the court of public opinion.
Well, in many ways, they were convicted in the court of public opinion. I do think that a lot of the suggestions were that this event didn't pass the smell test. I think even the media, to a certain extent, looked at with a sort of jaundiced eye at the case and Mr. Smollett's claims of being a victim. And it reminds us once again that we have to cover these cases with a certain detached remove. We have to adhere to the cardinal rule of journalism, which is if your mother says she loves you, check it out. That means whether it's the official—
2, 3, and 4 times.
That's right, whether it's the official account of events or whether it's the account from the alleged victim.
Jeffrey Weisberg, Andrew Weisberg, I'm sorry, I want to get back to this issue of so-called allocution. If there is a deal like this to drop charges, isn't it common that the defendant would go out and have to admit some kind of culpability?
Not necessarily. In most of these sort of pretrial diversions, and this is a very abbreviated version of a pretrial diversion, typically the state does not ask for that. Essentially, they don't ask them to plead guilty. They don't ask them to plead not guilty. They just give them a set of things to do, and if they complete it, the case is dismissed. So it would actually be unusual if they were to get up and apologize in one of these settings.
What about the fact, Jeffrey Erdangen, that this case was put under seal almost right away? Is that common?
I don't know what the statute says. I believe the prosecutor whose clip was played previously, that's a requirement. But I would think that you can move to unseal any file, and if the mayor or the police chief or anybody else thinks that justice wasn't done here, let's see what's in that file. I don't think they want to see that. They didn't dismiss this case for nothing. They dismissed this case because they couldn't prove it. And that
we should mention, though, the prosecutor says they saw nothing wrong with the evidence. And that's not why they dismissed it.
Well, it's a very unusual situation where a prosecutor says, I stand by my case. I'm confident in my evidence. And by the way, we're dismissing the charges against the defendant. In a case with got this much notoriety and this much attention, I'm sorry, that doesn't add up.
Charles Whitaker, we mentioned that the mayor called this a quote-unquote whitewash. What's your reaction to the mayor and Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson's statements today?
Oh, those are strong statements. Clearly, they're embarrassed. They went out on a limb declaring that they had an airtight case against Mr. Smollet. Apparently, the prosecutors didn't quite agree. I would say it's very odd to have this case dismissed with such little recourse for the defendant, and I think they have egg on their faces.
And Andrew Weisberg, what about the fact that they feel, the mayor and the police superintendent, that there was no consultation, they were blindsided? Is it normal for prosecutors and the police department to coordinate when a decision like this is going to be made?
Typically, they work together. Whether it's investigating cases and then obviously proving cases. So I was surprised to see the reaction that apparently the mayor and the police superintendent were completely blindsided. That was surprising. I think that's unusual.
And you know, Mr. Ndangan, you're saying that you don't believe the case was solid, else why would they do this? Or does it raise questions that perhaps there was some kind of outside influence on this? There were stories about Tina Chen, the former First Lady's Chief of Staff, trying to influence Kim Foxx. What about outside influence?
I find that difficult to take seriously, that there was some extrajudicial or outside communication going on that resulted in this outcome. I think it's much simpler than meets the eye, really. I mean, there's no need to complicate this situation. Their case collapsed. Their evidence was weak. Something was revealed, and I have no inside information about this, that showed the prosecutors that the defense is going to prove them wrong. He had 2 or more fine defense attorneys. They did their work. They prepared their case, and that's more than I can say for the grand jury investigation.
But again, I have to say again, that's not what the prosecutor is saying here. They're saying they had no problem with the evidence.
Yeah, I mean, that's what he said. I can't look behind him. I can't say that he's being dishonest, but you really have to use your common sense in this situation. That's what we tell jurors when we have jury trials. The thing that should drive the outcome here is what makes sense. Does it make sense that a prosecutor would dismiss a high-profile case like this in exchange for nothing from the defendant if their case really was strong?
So we have these dual narratives here. Charles Whitaker, how damaging is it for the community where we don't have a resolution? We have one side saying justice wasn't done because the charges were dropped. The other side saying Jussie Smollet was the victim of injustice.
I think the community has whiplash over this case and is actually quite tired of it. This has occupied a lot of our time and attention, and when it comes down to it, it really is another high-profile celebrity case. There's so many more important issues that we should be talking about and covering in the city of Chicago than this one supposed hate crime. So I don't know that it damages the public. I will agree with the mayor and the police chief in that it takes a lot of time and attention and resources away from really, really important elements that we should be both covering and talking about in Chicago. That's the most damaging thing.
Andrew Weisberg, can you come up with any other explanation for why this happened so swiftly?
I've been thinking about it all day, and I don't believe that it has to do with a lack of evidence. My impression is they can prove the case. And there are many cases that are dismissed, perfectly solid, airtight cases that do get dismissed this way through these deferred prosecutions. This one is unusual, but my gut feeling is they don't have any issues with proof here. There's something else behind it, and for the life of me, I can't figure out why they did it and why they did it so quickly.
And have you worked with Mr. Magatz, who is the Assistant U.S. State's Attorney who is on this case because Kim Foxx recused herself?
When I was in the office, I knew Joe, and he's an honorable guy. He's an honest guy, so I trust what he says. But it's still, to me, something is unusual about this, and there's something that I can't explain as to why they advanced the case. The case was originally set for April 17th. They advanced the case to today's date, went in and quietly dismissed the case. It was unusual.
Seems like the common refrain today. None of us can really explain what's going on. Jeffrey Ndangan, Andrew Weisberg, and Charles Whitaker, thank you all for attempting to explain it to us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.